Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bill Riviere, and I am the State Safe Routes to School Coordinator from NJDOT's Bureau of Safety, Bicycle, and Pedestrian Programs. As SRTS Coordinator and Manager of our Bike Ped Planning Assistance Program, my work is all about improving safety and accessibility for people who walk and bike. I work with New Jersey municipalities on plans for improved bicycle and pedestrian circulation. I work with our TMA partners to educate children on how to walk and bike safely. And I've spoken at senior centers across the state, teaching about traveling safely as we get older. I've worked in the bike ped world for over 20 years, and as a grizzled veteran, I'm amazed at how far we've come and all the improvements we continue to make. Now, in this session titled Cost-Effective Treatments, Testing Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Improvements Through Temporary Demonstration Projects, you will hear from experts who have installed temporary demonstration or pop-up projects and their lessons learned. Before we get started, please note that this session is being recorded, and after the Academy, the recordings of this and all the other sessions will be made available online. I hope you enjoy this session and join us for the rest of our sessions September 15th, 22nd, and 29th from 12 to 1:30. If you haven't already, register at saferoutesnj.org/safe-routes-academy. With that said, I will now turn it over to our moderator, the talented Leanne Von Hagen.
Thanks so much, Bill. And welcome, everybody. I'm so excited you're here today. My name's Leanne Von Hagen. I'm the Managing Director at the New Jersey DOT-supported Safe Routes Resource Center at Rutgers University. The Safe Routes Resource Center assists public officials, transportation and health professionals, and the general public in creating safer and more accessible walking and bicycling environments through research and education and programs like today's webinar. So I'm excited to moderate today's panel. I wanted to share something with you really exciting before we get started. And maybe it's just really exciting to me, but I hope it's really exciting to everyone. We just put together a video working with our partners at Department of Transportation, Civic Eye Collaborative, and the panelists on today's panel about demonstration programs, and today is our debut. So what we're really excited to do is start off this session with a short video to talk about demonstration programs. And then when the video is done, I'm going to come back and introduce our panelists and we'll get this session going. So you're here for the movie premiere, grab your popcorn and whatever food you have, because we appreciate you coming and spending your lunch with us. So Crystal, if you would run the video, that'd be great.
In New Jersey, improving safety on our roadways is a top priority. To help reach safety goals, communities all over the state have been implementing temporary demonstration projects. Demonstration projects are short-term, low-cost, temporary solutions to reimagine roadway and other public spaces to improve safety and quality of life for all users. They're a way to involve and engage the public in the road design process as a way of gaining support through open dialogue. Demonstration projects, which are also referred to as tactical urbanism, pop-up projects, or quick build projects, allow public agencies, community partners, residents, and visitors to test and implement a shared vision for improving public spaces. This try it before you buy it approach is low risk and allows organizers and communities to test assumptions and refine designs before committing to permanent changes or large financial investments. Some examples of demonstration projects you may see around New Jersey include temporary bike lanes, pop-up parks and seating, curb extensions, street murals and decorative crosswalks, open street events, and other innovative ideas. Projects are generally quick, flexible, scalable, adaptable, and inexpensive. With permissions in place, a pop-up bike lane can be installed in a day for the cost of a few cans of temporary paint and the help of some volunteers. Projects can include artistic elements to improve appearance and enhance visibility. Once a demonstration project is installed, it can be evaluated for potential impacts on people's behavior and comfort levels, economic impacts, impacts on traffic flow, and changes to roadway speeds. Short-term and low-cost demonstration projects provide the opportunity to to capture real-world data for streets and public spaces and encourage people to work together in new ways, strengthening relationships between residents, nonprofits, local businesses, and government agencies. Road design projects are inherently long-term and costly. A temporary demonstration project provides an opportunity to test a design with low-cost materials while bringing government leaders and community members together to demonstrate that little investment can make a big impact. Keep an eye out in your neighborhood, not only for temporary demonstration projects, but areas that might benefit from them. To start a conversation about demonstration projects, reach out to your municipality to talk about what's possible. For more information and for resources that can help you get started, please contact the New Jersey Safe Routes Resource Center.
And I'm so glad you asked in the comments where you can find this video, because I was just about to come back on and say we have the New Jersey Safe Routes to School YouTube channel, and this went up this morning. So it truly is a movie premiere. We'll post the link in the chat. And thank you for those who commented that you enjoyed the video. I really appreciate that. These things do take a little bit of work, as you can imagine. So, and this was actually filmed quite a bit over several years. Kind of over the past year. So on that note, it is the perfect introduction to the panelists, because the panelists are going to talk a lot about what you just saw in the video. A lot of the images that you just saw were for projects that our panelists are going to present to you today. So on that note, I'm going to introduce all the panelists together, and then they're going to hand the presentation over as they move along. So first up on our panel will be James Bonanno and Monika Powell. We're going to talk about a recent pop-up bike lane in Asbury Park. James is the acting transportation director for the city of Asbury Park, and Monika is pursuing her master's degree at Rutgers University, and her degree will be in city and regional planning with a specialization in transportation. Then we'll hear from Patrick Farley, who is the program director at Cross County Connection, TMA. Cross County Connection is a designated transportation management association for the 7 southern counties of New Jersey. He will showcase their work on a demonstration project in Collingswood. Then we'll wrap up with information about a demonstration project in Keyport, New Jersey, presented by Keith Hamus, who's a principal planner at the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to James and look for the chat for our link to the video. And then as well, I see you are all already using chat. Please, as people are presenting, please go ahead and put your questions into chat. Don't feel too self-conscious about what you want to put into chat. Just put your questions in, and we're going to get to a Q&A at the end. But we're going to take Q&A all through chat today. Okay. So at that note, I'm turning the presentation over to James and Monika. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm James Bonanno. I'm the Acting Director of Transportation for the City of Asbury Park. Next slide. We luckily had an opportunity to work with Rutgers to launch a pop-up bike lane this year, and it was a very fun, easy, and quick project that actually worked out very well for us. If you aren't familiar with us, next slide. We are a small municipality, about 15,000 total population, maybe 1.6 square miles, located in Monmouth County, right on the beachfront. We are a very popular summer destination for the beach and for restaurants and dining and drinking. And we have a large influx of residents and visitors over the summer that come in. And so we see a big population spike in the summer that leads to a lot of travel and a lot of navigating the city. We have a large bicycle network and bicycle community, people that ride to the beach, to around the city, to downtown, to the waterfront, to their homes, their rentals. And we've also seen a big uptick in our new micromobility program. We recently launched a scooter share program. Next slide. So we launched Super Pedestrian Link, launched in May 2021. We have about 250 e-scooters in the city at a time. It's up to, we kind of go down in the winter. And we have just over 50 geofenced parking corrals located all around, almost nearly every intersection basically in the city. We average around 21,000 trips per month in summer 2022. So as you can see, on top of the bike trips, we're seeing even more scooter trips and pedestrians and cars coming around. So we have a lot of road users sharing the space and navigating it together. And in the past, we've seen we have to kind of develop new ways for them to interact and be safe around each other. Next slide. So in 2018, the city adopted the walking and biking master plan. This was a master plan looking at the entire city, how we can improve pedestrian infrastructure, biking infrastructure, as well as keeping everybody safe around vehicles and everything. It highlighted a lot of the city's most popular cycling destinations and routes. You can see in our map here where our central business district is and where our waterfront is, and those red areas are all the areas that people are just congregating around. But one of the biggest things it did, it also identified some difficult or dangerous sections of roadway that we kind of needed to improve on. Next slide. So one of those areas was the intersection of Cookman Avenue and Asbury Avenue and Kingsley Street. So while going through this project, we realized that, Ocean Avenue, Kingsley Street, Cookman Avenue, Asbury Avenue, they're all involved in this intersection, and they all had about a moderate level of stress analysis It's stressful for bicycles to ride this intersection. It's not the most easy one to navigate, and there are a lot of vehicles. It does connect our central business district, which is located along Cookman Avenue, just to the east of this intersection, west of this intersection, with Ocean Avenue, our waterfront on the east side of this intersection. It is the main connection between our downtown and our waterfront, our two biggest draws for the city. You can go to the next slide. The intersection itself has some geometric complications. If you look at the approach from Cookman Avenue to the intersection coming from the west side, it gets wide, and a lot of vehicles treat it as there's two travel lanes when there really is only one. We have sharrows, we have some bicycle infrastructure in place, we have bike lanes along Kingsley and along Asbury Avenue, but we also have pedestrian bump outs that, while they make great crossing for pedestrians, tighten the roadway a little bit and kind of make it difficult for the bicycles and vehicles to navigate the intersection together. So while our walking master plan made some recommendations for this area and for these roadways, it didn't give any clear direction to this intersection. And while looking at our plan and developing it and going through with our recommendations, we took a step back to say, maybe there's something more we could do with bicycle infrastructure to really improve this intersection. Maybe there's ways we can, instead of redesigning the entire thing, add something specific in that might change the way people act or see other modes of transportation and how they use them. Next slide. So we had a plan we'll wait to kind of talk about that, but the biggest first step of going through with this was kind of building support. We didn't want to do anything too permanent because we knew how people saw this area. People kind of viewed this intersection as cars. If you do anything, it's going to back up. If you do anything, it's going to create traffic jams. So we couldn't do anything permanent. We had to start somewhere small, and we started by listing some allies. We tried to find, we had Rutgers. So we had the studio class on the side that wanted to do a project, and we said, what, this pop-up bike lane idea might be good. Maybe we can do some pop-up infrastructure. So we also had allies, on our city council, in our building itself, people that we knew would be on our side and help us, portray this project in a good light. Because, a lot of these projects come across as, people see them as, I should say, detrimental or problems with it's going to affect their way they drive. And yes, but not in a negative way. A big part of getting that building support is defining the problem and the goal. We spent some time really defining the intersection, defining what the problems were, and kind of discussing what our lasting solution was hoping to be, what our goal was. We used like pictures and maps and everything to clearly explain our project and show what we were proposing. I think having that physical representation of what you want to do is probably the best way to people to see and understand what you're saying, because a clear explanation of the project is going to help you go a long way. You don't want any confusion. You don't want to have people to assume you're doing something crazier than what you're actually doing. And a biggest part of this was setting a beginning and end date. A lot of people's concerns were kind of, they can let them go because they knew, okay, it's only a month, it's 4 weeks, and then we can go back to what this is, and it won't be too disruptive, it won't be crazy, it won't get in the way of what I think the traffic should be like in this area. On top of that, you should definitely have a plan to quantify your results. I mean, people want to hear, what's the point of this? What are you going to do with this information? What information are you going to get out of it? Have a plan to quantify what you're getting out of your project. And when you share that with your, constituents and people that you need to get their support, they'll hopefully see it in a better way and say, okay, I can see what you're going for. I can see what you're going to get, and we'll see how it goes. Whether they disagree or agree with what you're proposing, they can say, all right, I don't believe the numbers will match, or I think the numbers will match, and then we'll move forward with that. The final most important thing with building support for these projects is to consider everyone's concerns and compromise. Our project didn't go exactly the way we planned it in the first day. We had to make some compromises the whole way through, and it didn't, ruin our project in any way. It just wasn't the same project, and that's in no way a bad thing. Next slide. So I'll turn it over to Monika Pyle. She was one of the grad students in the Rutgers Studio course who helped us develop the project and implement the project, as well as, find results and get us all the information we needed. She'll walk you through how the project worked, their process, and everything.
Thank you, James. Hello, everyone. I'm Monika, and I will be presenting about the process of the pop-up bike and scooter lane project that I worked on during my graduate planning studio at the Rutgers University. Next slide. The main goal of our studio was to encourage micromobility use in Asbury Park by improving the user safety, convenience, and comfort. To achieve our goals, our project had 3 objectives. First, designing and installing a safe and temporary pop-up bike lane. Second, obtaining a public feedback on the temporary pop-up bike lane to identify some key areas for improvement to the bike lane design. And third, we want to create a series of recommendations for improving the micromobility infrastructure in Asbury Park. Next slide. The studio team consisted of first and second year graduate students from the Edward J. Bloustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University. The members of the team brought knowledge and expertise from various academic and professional backgrounds. While impact of the COVID-19 pandemic was easing through the duration of the project, the studio's team was still able to meet with clients and stakeholders through a virtual setting. Next slide. So why do we do a demonstration project? In simple words, to see if it works. The studio team and the city worked together to select portions of Asbury and Cookman avenues for the demonstration project in order to help show that what safer connectivity between these 2 proper destinations can look like with enhanced designs focused on walking, bicycling, and micromobility. The studio team and the city were confident that the selected segments of Asbury and Cookman avenues have the space necessary to better accommodate bikes as well as e-scooters. And we were very excited to use this as an opportunity to allow the community to see and experience how some very simple changes can improve conditions for bike and e-scooter riders without even impeding the flow of traffic. Next slide. This map shows the final bike lane proposal. After several discussions and feedback, the final plan was developed to implement a bike and scooter lane along both sides of Cookman Ave, starting from St. James Place and along the southern side of Asbury Ave, ending at Ocean Ave. The final plan also included a protected intersection treatment at the Cookman Ave and Asbury Ave intersection. Next slide. The Cookman Ave currently has no bike lanes, and it has parallel parking spots on both sides of the street. There was also 2 NJ Transit bus stops on both sides of the street. So in our proposal, we removed the parking spots to fully utilize the parking lane on both sides of the street to accommodate a 5 feet wide bike lane with a 3 foot wide buffer with traffic cones. The travel lanes remain the same under the proposal. We didn't touch the travel lanes. We used the Street Mix website to generate the existing and proposed cross-section. And this website is easy to use and is free. Next slide. This is an overhead view of the design of the demonstration bike lane proposal along Cookman Ave, which we prepared using AutoCAD software. Next slide. For the bus stops at Cookman Ave, we needed to ensure ADA compliance. The NJT buses need to be able to stop against the curb to accommodate wheelchair users. To accommodate these needs, the design called for traffic cones in the buffer to not be placed within proximity of the bus stops to allow enough space for the bus to stop and reach the curb. Next slide. Moving on to the intersection, our proposal also focused on enhancing safety for people on foot, bicycle, and scooters at the intersection of Cookman Ave, Asbury Ave, and Kingsley Street. Some of the intersection corners have larger turning radii, which can be made to feel safer by tightening the radius so drivers do not round the corner very speedily. Therefore, for the intersection, the studio team proposed a corner island on the Cookman Ave to Asbury Ave right turn, and also on the Asbury Ave to Kingsley Street right turn to discourage sweeping turns and in order to lower the turning vehicle speeds. The corner island also created a setback between the motor vehicle traffic and the riders in the bike and scooter lane. The intersection design also featured a protected intersection, which sets the bike lane apart from motor vehicle traffic and did not force bike users to merge into mixed traffic. Instead, they were given a dedicated path through the intersection. Next slide. This is the detailed design of the proposal for intersection, which we again prepared in AutoCAD software. Next slide. Coming on to the Asbury Ave. Asbury Ave is a popular parking area for beachgoers because it is so close to the boardwalk and the beach. While Asbury Avenue is wide enough to accommodate two 5-foot bike lanes on both sides, doing so would have required adjusting pavement parkings for either the center line or the existing parkings. To avoid those complications in a demonstration project, the proposal called for inclusion of only one bike and scooter lane on the eastbound lane of the street heading toward Ocean Ave. Next slide. As you can see in this overview shot, narrowing the eastbound lane to 11 feet allowed for a 5-foot bike and scooter lane while maintaining the center line's current position. Next slide. Implementing our design required some materials and equipment as well. We were able to borrow field line striping machines, orange cones, plastic delineators, and corrugated plastic signs from the city and our project partners. The materials which we purchased included a sheet of vinyl flooring to cut out our own bike lane stencil and cans of some temporary chalk spray in green, yellow, and white. The total installation expenses for the materials purchased were only $212.58. Next slide. The bike lane was finally launched on Friday, the April 1st in 2022. Next slide. First, the team marked the streets with chalk and used tape measures for consistent lanes. Next slide. After setting up the guiding lines, the team spray chalk painted the bike and scooter lane using field line paint stripers. The green paint was used to delineate the extent of the bike and scooter lane itself, and white paint was used to mark 3-foot buffer lanes. We used yellow paint for corner islands on the intersection. Next slide. We also used white chalk paint to add bike lane markings to the bicycle and scooter lanes in order to add a visual reminder that the lane is meant for cyclists and scooter use. The stencil we used was roughly 5 feet by 4 feet in size and cut from a piece of vinyl flooring. As seen above, the portions of the buffer utilized orange traffic cones to add another dimension of safety. Next slide. Post-installation, the team hung flyers on bus stops, advertising the bike lane and encouraging people to take the online survey. We were also able to borrow and post these pop-up bike lanes from Easy Ride TMA. We observed a couple of bicyclists using the bike lanes immediately after they had been sprayed. Next slide. Once the bike lane was installed, we gathered some feedback from the bike users. Next slide. The survey questions were developed between the studio team and the research experts at Rutgers. Questions were designed to gain information about the public's experience using the pop-up bike lane and the use of bikes and e-scooters in Asbury Park more generally. Next slide. This was one of the questions we asked in the survey. When asked to rate the safety of the pop-up bike lane on a 0 to 10 scale, most respondents gave fairly high rating. 76% out of 58 total surveys rated it 6 or higher. The average safety rating was around 7.5. And participants also overwhelmingly supported making the lane permanent. About 90% of 62 respondents were in favor. The rest were either undecided or opposed. Next slide. At the end of the survey, the participants were able to leave open-ended comments. Out of 35 respondents, 24 gave statements of support for making the bike lane permanent, expanding bike lanes across entire Asbury Park, or for improving bicycle and scooter infrastructure in general. Next slide. Some respondents felt that the bike and scooter lane would have an overall positive impact on the city and tourism as a whole, and that they will enhance the safety of the Asbury Park. Next slide. And I really want to thank James for supporting us throughout the studio presentation and studio duration, because of whom this project won't be possible. So I will turn back presentation to James now for the lessons learned.
Thank you, Monica. You go to the next slide. So during this whole process, this was new to kind of all of us. It was definitely my first pop-up bike lane or anything kind of temporary like this. And there's definitely some things we learned along the way. I mean, for one, you have to be flexible in your planning. Things are going to change. We originally had plans for a whole protected bike lane down Ocean Avenue. And, you know, it was kind of viewed negatively, and we asked to remove it. And it actually turned out better because we definitely would not have had time to paint that whole thing. This took a whole day to paint already, and all that extra work would have been lost, or it would have negatively affected what we had done. Definitely alert all affected parties, residents nearby, police, DPW, advocates, whoever you can think of, just so that they only understand the project. We had some confusion about whether you could or could not park in the areas where we were removing parking for this time period. So we dealt with it and we talked people through, but it would have been easier had we reached out ahead of time and got in front of that. Always order a few extra materials. While you might end up using them, even better, you might actually have something left over for the next project. I mean, we're not talking about a lot of money here. We said it was about $200 something for this whole project. And now I have extra cans of paint and materials that I could use for a new project, you know? And the next project might be viewed even more positively because I'm not spending any money now because we already have the paint. So I would always just say, order a little extra. When you have the opportunity to order something, order a little extra, so you have it for something in the future. Be prepared for complications. Things aren't really going to go as well as you think. You know, it's perfectly, I should say, as you think. We use a lot of cones to try to delineate that buffered zone to make sure that no one crossed over, to make sure it was acknowledged. And some unhappy drivers were getting out of their cars and moving them out of the way. And we had to keep moving them back. We had to keep monitoring the station and the lane, and putting them back kind of regularly. So it's just something you have to be cognizant of. People are going to kind of, people don't like it, they're kind of mess with your temporary implications or installations. Smaller projects are often easier than bigger projects. Like I said, if we had gone along with our lane along Ocean Avenue, we might have lost some of our quality on the rest of the project. And the intersection for us was the big part. So focus on a small location, do something smaller. You don't need to do the whole roadway. You could do a part of it just to get the point across. And again, one thing, well, we had our surveys, we had some of our metrics. I wish we had more metrics. I wish I had more numbers of people who went through it, more bike numbers, more bus numbers, more car numbers. Having as many metrics as possible to quantify your results is going to be super helpful when it comes to, convincing people that this project worked, that it went well. I mean, this project went well. People liked it. It's even the paint still on the ground. Cars are still obeying by it, and no one's really concerned about it. Bicycles are still using it as it fades out, and cars are still kind of respecting the space, at least mostly. So it's worked pretty well. And now we're just working at convincing everyone that this did work well, and it should be something permanent. If you have more and more quantifiable numbers to prove your point, it's just going to be easier. Next slide. So what's next for us? I mean,
And
we're developing
James,
a plan now.
We're running a little bit over, so just.
Sure, last slide.
Thanks.
We're developing a plan now for permanent infrastructure in this location. If this lane's going to be it, or if we're going to change it a little bit, we have to kind of work through what metrics we've received and what we can do next to make a permanent infrastructure there, and to solidify this lane as a useful and helpful piece of infrastructure. We're also working in the city just towards completing our bicycle network that's outlined in our walking and biking master plan, as well as building up our shared services, possibly even new bike share if we can find a vendor that would work with us. But that's all I have. The next slide. I just want to thank Rutgers for all your help, and as well as Easy Ride, helped out a lot too. This was a great project, and I encourage everyone to try a pop-up bike lane or pop-up infrastructure if you have the opportunity. Thank you. Oh, actually, sorry. Introducing next, Patrick Farley from Cross County Connections is going to take over with his presentation next. Thank you.
Thanks, James. And Monica, that was a really fantastic presentation. And a lot of the things I'm going to talk about kind of have similar types of lessons and things that I can build upon because we have a lot of the same experience. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is a series of projects that were done in Collingswood, New Jersey, and Camden County over a period of a few months. We called this concept the Complete Streets Lab because it was a series of projects that tested out multiple types of bike and pedestrian safety facilities. The idea of, this is a test. Next slide. For those that aren't familiar, Bill mentioned earlier the TMAs. We are the TMA for South Jersey, but a lot of the TMAs provide similar services, covering a range of things, anything to encourage the use of sustainable transportation options. Two of the programs that kind of tie into this one is Safe Routes to School. We have a Safe Routes to School coordinator, and our staff goes into the schools and educates kids on safe behaviors. We also do something called travel plans, which are like kind of small bicycle pedestrian master plans within close proximity to elementary schools. And this project I'm talking about was tied into our Complete Streets program. Next slide. So this project, DVRPC put out a study, in 2019 that was discussing parking at PACO stations. If you're familiar with Collingswood, it's a fairly small borough. It's built before the Highway Act. It's not really suburban sprawl. It's more traditional kind of development. So it's not a large town. Very walkable. It's really well known for its walkable downtown. But they were finding that almost a quarter of the vehicles that were parked at the station were from residences within a half mile. That's a 10-minute walk. So we thought, what can we do to encourage more people to bike and walk to the station? Also, we found that there was, a fair high number of bicycle pedestrian crashes. So there are safety concerns. So it's a priority to test things that could improve that. Also, Collingswood and their neighboring town of Haddon Township did a joint bicycle pedestrian master plan. And these streets that were the focus were included in that master plan. And these were basically identified as priority streets by the public during the outreach process. So the goals were to encourage biking and walking, get that number of people parking down, educate people on why these projects are important, but also why walking and biking is important, the benefits of it. And then building support for safer streets throughout the community. We figured if people can test it, people see it, maybe they'll buy into the types of facilities being tested, and that's an opportunity to do more. Next slide. This project was a fairly sizable one, as you'll see in a later slide. So it had a lot of partners. Really great partners in the borough of Collingswood. PACO was absolutely awesome to work with. They really gave us wide discretion on what we would do. We're very supportive. The Perkins Center of the Arts is the one who provided assistance with doing some of those colorful curb extensions. You saw some of those in the video. Those were from the Collingswood project. Camden County was involved. We did have to have access to one of their streets, or two of their streets in both projects. And then the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission was especially involved early for the first phase of the project, which I'll discuss. Next slide. Oh, somebody asked about PACO. PACO is the Port Authority Transit Company. It operates it oversees the bridges, but also operates a small a train line that runs into Camden County. It's the equivalent sort of like PATH in North Jersey. The this was a kind of a two-phase project. We received funding from DVRPC through one of their grant programs, but they have another program that is free to municipalities within their region. And they thought it was a good opportunity to do kind of one small step in this process. So it was done through their experimental pop-ups program, which is called Expo. This project, which was a series of curb extensions and an advisory bike lane, was done in the summer, and it was tied into a few weeks of farmers markets. The farmers markets meant it was drawing people to the area, people that might use the facility. Also, it allowed us to set up tabling events to kind of educate people in real time what was right next to them. If you are interested in DVRPC's Expo program, if you're within the DVRPC region in New Jersey, which consists of Mercer, Burlington, Camden, and Gloucester counties, feel free to reach out to them. I can also put you in contact with them. They are always looking for candidates to participate in this program. That is the link to their website. If these slides are shared, you can use that to get to that website. Next slide, please. So phase 2 was a project largely led by us at Cross County Connection TMA. As I mentioned, this was supported through funding from DVRPC. This project ran in the spring. Spring is a fine time to do these kinds of projects, but you might want to do it later in spring, because I will say that April was an extremely difficult time to construct some of these projects. We were receiving, for about 2 weeks, a substantial amount of rain that really delayed everything and made public events difficult. So that's just another lesson learned, is really think about weather. So this also, since it was funded through it's a program TOP, but it's funded through something called congestion management and air quality. That is efforts to reduce congestion and improve air quality. It's pretty what the title says. So it had to include something that was really targeted at public transportation. So we did a pretty large education promotional campaign centered on the local PACO stops that were near the project. One of them involved something called a targeted social media campaign, where if people were passing through the station, actually this is a web campaign, sorry. If they were going through the station, and when you're on your cell phone, you might see pop-up ads kind of pop up. Well, these would be ads that were popping up as people were, reading the news and things like that, educating on the benefits of biking and walking, but also details about the project. We also were able to keep costs low, one, by purchasing cheaper materials when we needed them, but also there was support from NJTPA, who Keith will be speaking later, and lending us some materials. Next slide, please. So I mentioned this was a large project. You don't necessarily have to do a project this scale to be successful. So it involved a series of streets that were immediately surrounding the station. It tested a wide variety of different applications. So this was a big project. It was a big undertaking. That's why it was really like a year-long type of project. Next slide, please. So one of the aspects we tested was Maple Avenue is a street that parallels Haddon Avenue, which is functions as the main street. It is a county road. It has a lot of traffic, and it has it's limited its width to accommodate bike lanes. So one of the ideas in the master plan was to do, create some form of bikeway on Maple Avenue. So what we found was maybe an appropriate treatment was doing a bike boulevard. And this bike boulevard is a concept that the borough wanted to take a look at because they're considering applying for grant funding to do something more permanent. So what we did here was, you mentioned there were bump outs mentioned, which is a pedestrian safety feature. It's used to narrow roadways to slow traffic. This was already a pretty narrow road, but the curb extension served sort of a different process. People were parking extremely close to the crosswalks, which causes visibility issues for pedestrians and bicyclists using the streets. So we use these to keep people away from the intersection. They were also a really good opportunity to kind of create gateway treatments, to kind of signal drivers, hey, you're entering a bit of a different environment. We use signage and pavement markings along with that to kind of educate people, like, cyclists will be here. They have a right to be here. They'll be using the full lane. So, drive slowly accordingly. Next slide. These curb extensions also gave us an opportunity to test out some, and during the first phase of the project, people said, oh, we really would have loved to see some sort of demonstration of rain gardens. So for those unaware, rain gardens are a type of green stormwater like management infrastructure. So what they do, this is a simulation because they would involve much more engineering and things like that. They basically capture stormwater so that it doesn't flood, and also it filters the stormwater so that when it enters local waterways, it's cleaner. This street is located less than, I think, like a half mile from the Cooper River, which is a really popular river that hosts things like regattas and sailing, and it's a really important county feature, and you need to keep that water clean also because it's a source of drinking water. So what we did is we went out and we purchased flowers to kind of simulate what these things look like. We put out signage that educates them on the science behind them, the reason they're used, and just made them look a little bit nicer than some of the other curb extensions. And really it added a great way to kind of improve the aesthetics of the bike boulevard. Next slide, please. So this was a big part of the project. This is a protected bike lane that brought people right up to the station itself. This is a PACO controlled roadway. So PACO previously had a parking area that was along this street that was a taxi station area. Taxis are now less common due to the ride sharing things like Uber and Lyft that have come on the scene. So they said we really didn't need any more, and they wanted ideas on what could fill that space. Luckily, it was just wide enough to fit a protected bike lane. So it did require moving the center line, which sometimes would not be advisable in a demonstration project. But as I mentioned, PACO was really game and supportive for a lot of different things. So they were willing to black out the existing center line and shift it over so we could put this protected bike lane in and restripe the yellow center line. And yeah, basically, this was a facility that we really wanted to kind of be the focus of the project. Since this was going to be a bit of a longer term demonstration, we used some more permanent types of kind of quick build types of materials, including flexible delineators that used epoxy to go into the ground. We used the bike lane stencils that were shown in the previous presentation. We did use a paint that had to weather, that had to deal with the weather a lot more. As we said, it was really rainy all the time, so we used a paint that was more of a higher grade kind of almost traffic paint as opposed to spray chalk, which could wear away with vehicle traffic and weather. That's our staff out there installing it. It was a really fun experience, and just a great way to kind of get staff on board in a fun project. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we tied this into a larger marketing and education campaign. So in areas within close proximity and along the streets that were involved in the project, we posted educational signs, kind of promoting why it's really important to walk and bike. These were focused on the health benefits and environmental impacts. And also we, use them to kind of just educate that, the station's not as far as you think it is. And also it's a great way to save money because at this time was when we were approaching the highest gas prices, almost $6 a gallon last spring. So we kind of used that as an opportunity to kind of, show that you can save a decent amount of money if you're limiting those, limiting like 2 miles a day, a mile a day. That does add up over the process of like a year. Next slide, please. So another thing that's really important to mention is education. We used A-frame signs to educate people, again, on the purpose of these types of facilities. We also used it to educate them on how to use the facilities. This is extremely important with a treatment like an advisory bike lane, especially because it's not a very familiar concept in the United States. It is something that is used on narrower streets in Europe, and it has the potential to be a very effective facility. Especially in those older towns that don't have those wide residential streets. We call it yield streets where cars, have to maybe tuck behind parked vehicles to let other traffic through. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we also did this, part of the campaign was educating people on really how close the station is. So up to a mile out, we were posting a lot of signs along these priority streets that were educating them on, really roughly the equivalent time to walk. So, people might not be thinking like, oh, that's really a 10-minute walk. It's just, if you set aside time in your day, it's a 10-minute walk, you might be more apt to do that. Also, what we did was you could scan that link with your cell phone and it would automatically take you out to Google Maps with the destination of the populating the destination to the PACO station. So you click walk and bike and it would tell you exactly the streets to use to get there and the time it would take you. Next slide, please. This type of project does require a lot of outreach. You can never have too much education and outreach involved with these types of projects. As has been documented in James and Monika's presentation, surveys are extremely important, or some method to kind of assess the success of the project. So we had paper surveys that we used at events. We would go to the PACO station, hand them out, but we also had tablets on hand at those events where people could do it electronically. We shared the survey through social media, on the township, on the borough website. So we did whatever we could to get the most feedback as possible. Also, the idea of seeking input, adjusting the project as needed, that is extremely important, and it's good to be flexible and willing to listen to the comments, because really that's the point of these, is to kind of test them out, see what works and what doesn't work, and adjust accordingly. So that's really one of the selling points to the community is, hey, if it's not working right, this isn't permanent, we'll just shift it. And that did happen. Occasionally things had to change with where things were placed, or how things were painted, or what signs were being used. So we adjusted accordingly. We extensively use social media. Both the borough and PACO were really supportive in getting the word out, but we also did some very customized types of social media for this project. We did, the borough had a newsletter that was consistently used to educate in advance of the project. And also the borough went out, elected officials went out and did door-to-door canvassing to talk to people, especially along the streets that were going to be impacted. Passing out flyers, taking questions. If the person was not there, they left the flyer, which had their contact information. The borough commissioner was fine to handle that kind of email. We also went to local businesses and asked them to display flyers and materials. We put information boards. So we have those education boards that were put out to kind of talk about what facilities are being tested. We also had ones out that were providing, we put out well in advance of the project that educated on the project, let know what was coming up, some of the associated community events that would be part of it. And then we also tried our best to meet with community advocates, trying to build that a group of allies that one could help us volunteer to kind of participate, but also just be a source of positive feedback. You will get negative feedback during these things. So if you build a network of supportive people for this project, they can kind of help you talk about the project in a positive light, and maybe talk to those people who have concerns. So it doesn't fall all on you or the municipality to kind of handle that. Next slide, please. So in terms of outcomes, we measured a 10% increase of people walking to the station during peak hour commutes on weekdays. We saw a 27% increase in the amount of people who were biking to the station during those times. 73% of the survey respondents said they would walk or bike more if these projects became permanent. That's extremely important to document that, because you will find often the loudest voices are the ones calling the mayor and telling them that this is an awful idea. You may get a lot of negative comments on social media, but if you have survey results that can demonstrate something like that, that is really valuable to hand over to elected officials and say, while you might not be getting as many phone calls from these people, this is the silent majority. You are having a positive impact in your community. They like what we're doing. Over 121,000 social media impressions on PACO communitors. When they're using social media, they were seeing information about this project on the web, on social media. And also PACO was really great because they allowed us access to their stations and use of their LCD screens where they provide information on the services like delays and things like that. You were constantly seeing LCD advertisements for the project. And also it was educating people on upcoming events like, hey, look out, we're gonna be doing a coffee with commuters event where we would go out to the station with coffee and refreshments and you know, have the signs there and field questions. We also did some community events that were near the station in an area that we kind of cordoned off to be a pedestrian plaza right in front of the station. Unfortunately, it did rain a lot during this project, so a lot of those events had to be canceled. Other really great outcomes is PACO and Collingswood are currently working together to make these protected bike lanes permanent. PACO sought funding through we have a TMA grant funding program that we do for our members where they apply for funding to improve biking and walking conditions. They use that. It's not a large grant program, which demonstrates just how cost effective these things are. They use that just to get the supplies to make this a little bit more of a durable project that can stand, you know, the weather changes and, you know, be out there for a few years, you know, with maintenance. And then the curb extensions that I showed earlier, and you saw them also in that video, they're still out there. The county is fine with them. What you need to do is if you're creating a new pedestrian crossing, you have to make sure it's ADA accessible. And I'll show you an example of how we did that. Next slide, please.
And Pat, we need to wrap up in the next minute.
Sure.
Or so? Okay.
You can just blow through these. These are just before afters. And then I'll get my lessons learned, and then that'll be it. So, you know, there's protected bike lane. Next slide. We did have one negative outcome. The advisory bike lanes, as I mentioned, were really new treatment. So next slide, please. Those did not make it. Those did not stick around, unfortunately, but we learned some lessons from that. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, you know, it really helps. So start small. This is a really large project and maybe a little bit too ambitious for the borough to do as its first project. You could do a small project in a shorter duration, like tied into a community event, using even cheaper materials in a smaller scale. Reach out early for help. Volunteers are critical. If you are going to be doing anything on a road that's not under local jurisdiction, you need to get permits and approvals. Always reach out early to find out what those are if you're doing a county road. You will never have too much education. Start earlier than you even think is necessary, months and months and months in advance, just to build support for this project. And again, don't let the haters get you down. I mentioned there was a lot of loud voices that were complaining about this, but we had a lot of people who were very supportive. We made sure to try to bring those voices to the front as much as possible. All right, thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand things off to Keith Hamas from North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, talk about their project in Keyport and a few other interesting tidbits about demonstration projects.
Thank you, Patrick. That was a really interesting mix of elements to demonstrate the benefits of complete and green streets. That was a nice overlap, and they often do overlap in design and purpose. So I was glad to see that. Anyway, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the Safe Routes Academy for including me on this panel. It's a pleasure to join the discussion and share how NJTPA supports demonstration projects and other complete streets initiatives. For those unfamiliar, the NJTPA, North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, is the federally authorized metropolitan planning organization for the North Jersey region. We have a board of trustees that includes elected officials from 13 counties and a mix of state transportation agencies representation. So they basically help to allocate federal funding for transportation improvement projects and a variety of planning studies, such as the one that I'll be discussing here today. Next slide, please. So the NJTPA does have several programs that help facilitate complete streets planning. And I think we're seeing a lot of growth in that tactical urbanism approach. Some of the fellow panelists have revealed there are many benefits to this kind of hands-on method for planning. So we may be seeing how making these small movements can kind of grow into a movement. And today, I'll focus mostly on a specific demonstration project from the NJTPA's Planning for Emerging Centers program. And that's a program that supports implementation of regional sustainability planning at the local level. I'll also give you a quick overview about other supportive programs for demonstration projects and a little bit about what's coming up next. The NJTPA does support a wide range of complete streets planning. And here are a few programs that do that. The Complete Streets Technical Assistance is a program that assists municipalities with complete streets planning. It's now in its third round. And one of the options for applicants for this program is to request technical assistance for demonstration projects. I'll also point out we have a regional active transportation plan in progress now. And through that, we're developing a conceptual regional bike and pedestrian network. So we're trying to improve safety and connectivity and accessibility for all. We also have recurring funding programs for the highway safety improvement programs, federal funding for capital improvements that support bike and pedestrian safety. We have road safety audits that occur every now and then. That's basically an organized walk or bike tour that through a specific corridor kind of helps gather feedback from participants about their experience on that corridor. The Street Smart NJ is a pedestrian safety education and enforcement campaign program, and that has served a growing list of over 200 communities around the state. And there are also a variety of NJTPA plans and study, especially the long range plan, Plan 2050. This is what guides our planning strategies for that NJTPA takes on. Next slide, please. So the Keyport Complete Streets Policy and Implementation Plan was, it came out of Keyport requesting or applying for the program to address public concerns around safety and especially for walking and biking and getting kids to school safely. So this project included a demonstration project installation as a focal point for public engagement. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that took shape. The overall goal was to develop a plan that the borough can use for its formalizing its commitment to future transportation and land use decision making. So the demonstration project was in this scope as a phase of public engagement and also kind of a way of transitioning from paper to concrete. So before I begin, I just want to quickly acknowledge some of the key players. We had Keyport Borough leadership that was involved in this and really dedicated a lot of time and energy to developing the plan and installing the demonstration project. I want to also thank the consultant team at FHI for coordinating the development of a set of complete streets resources and recommendations, and also their guidance in designing and installing the project. And I also want to thank Monmouth County Planning and Engineering for their teamwork and really helping authorizing a demonstration project on a county roadway. And that was an important piece because it gives a great example of interjurisdictional coordination. Next slide, please. Yeah, any plan or project that we have has public outreach as a required element, and it seems that demonstration projects are a good fit in that category. I think there's kind of an evolution going on as far as gathering public feedback, and just as an example here, seeing a shift in 2020 during the COVID experience, we had to test out new approaches with Keyport. And we developed a project website with a video game format for collecting public feedback on a variety of different topics. Participants could kind of sign on as a player, and then they gain points through different participation in activities, some of which I'll explain a little bit, but for example, voting on design preferences for different types of roads. And the real advantage here was that they could join and participate at any time on their own terms. Is a very modern approach that worked out well for us. Next slide, please. An example of that was the players had a chance to consider different design options for different roadways, and one example was Rate Your Street. They were able to score intersections and roadways, corridors for biking and walking safety and compatibility. So that really helped to directly inform the recommendations for the plan, and it identified a practical bike network. In total, we had over 250 survey responses and over 100 participants for the online workshops. And again, it really helped to inform the recommendations. Next slide, please. The demonstration project that we installed as part of this plan was at a Henry Hudson Trail crossing on Maple Place. And here you can see on the top portion, there's the trail runs diagonally across the street network. It's a little bit awkward, and it lacks high visibility for crossing and trail users. So the bottom photo shows a full-scale aerial of the demonstration project, and it lasted about a week from May 14th to the 21st of last year. And the purpose of this project was to satisfy a few objectives. It was to address a safety need for walking and biking. And we also wanted to set up at a high-profile location to help generate more interest and enthusiasm for people that are walking and biking. The Henry Hudson Trail is a real true regional asset for Monmouth County, and it carries a lot of pedestrians across different municipalities. We also wanted to test a solution that goes above and beyond what you might see as a standard safety treatment. And again, a light, quick, cheap approach. We wanted this to be temporary and reversible. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit about who was involved. As I mentioned, Maple Place and the Henry Hudson Trail are both county facilities. This required a fair amount of coordination with the county planners and engineers to address some of the concerns around the design standards. And I'll point out that this was a NACDO-based design. That's a national set of professional engineering standards that it specializes in a little bit more of a progressive and adaptable approach for urban streets. And it's not necessarily something that you'd see in the county's engineering toolbox. So we had a few extra meetings to arrive at a design that met everyone's needs, and including accommodation for all vehicles like trucks. So the borough also had a team that they put together to install the project, and the consultants popped in to help guide that installation, but county engineers were also there visiting on site with their safety vests and measuring tape for quality assurance. It was all installed with very minimal disruption to the roadway operations. Next slide, please. So some of the planning details are shown here. You can see that it's a combination of painted curb bump outs, which help to increase visibility, reduce the crossing distances, and narrow the lanes to help calm traffic. There were also some new advanced signs for the trail crossing, and there was a two-way bike lane segment at the south side of the intersection to encourage cyclists to cross safely at right angles. This is an example of a NACDO-based design that you wouldn't typically see on a county roadway. Finally, using temporary materials, just plastic delineators and tempera paint, and all that washed away very easily. Next slide, please. From a planning perspective, this design offered a few safety benefits, and it was very simple, highly functional, and it really helped to align the county with what the borough was trying to achieve for a bike walk network. So as I mentioned, the trail and the roadway itself are both kind of important for Keyport folks getting around, but they're also both county facilities. This is often the case in municipalities. You'll see where road ownership becomes somewhat of a challenge. You might identify an important place for a safety solution, but if you don't own the road segment, it can be a non-starter. So here we had a demonstration project that really lived up to its name and helped to demonstrate the benefits, but also what can be possible through coordination. So here is a good case where we brought the borough and the county to the same table to reach consensus on a design. Next slide, please. We also had a poster on site. It gave the opportunity for the trail users to stop and quick scan of the QR code, and they could comment on the installation. As James noted earlier, this physical project, it really gives people a chance to see and understand a proposed project on the ground in a much clearer way. And the survey results that we saw were overwhelmingly positive and supportive. Anecdotally, I could say that people seemed happy to be using the trail and have this, very clear and safe, visible crossing. Next slide, please. And getting back to the try before you buy notion that we heard from the intro video, I think this testing aspect of demonstration projects is especially useful for as a planning tool. Demonstrates what we might improve with a more permanent design. So this project tested design, and it was a success in what it did is a traffic calming mechanism. Anecdotally, I saw that it really motorists that were approaching it reduced their speed. Whether or not there was even anyone in the crosswalk or bicyclists nearby, it just seemed to calm people down, take a look at what was going on, and it was very harmonious. But we also found that it wasn't perfect. You can see here some of the cyclists were maybe not following the cycle track and crosswalk as it was intended. So that points to a need for some adjustments and maybe some better directional signage for cyclists from either direction. So, and with that, I also wanted to echo what James mentioned earlier, that it's important to quantify the results. And that really helps to justify and strengthen applications for a more permanent design project funding. Next slide, please. The demonstration project was only on the ground for a week or so, but it really set up some longer term improvements and opportunities. So now the Borough of Keyport has a set of documents with this complete streets plan. They have an ordinance and design guides. They can really pull together some of these resources. Here's a snip of the quick build guide, which offers some kind of a progressive process for infrastructure improvements, and it's distinguished by phase, by intended duration of a project. So the demonstration project is kind of the entry point, and it could be, as short as a weekend or longer. And then as you get through this, go through these phases, an interim design might last a couple of years and require some more money, sturdier materials, and involve some more, maybe some beautification and artwork as well. And eventually get to the long-term capital type of project, which is more capital intensive and a permanent design structure. So the borough now has experience with drafting a demonstration project design, coordinating with the county. They can install and remove these designs and collect feedback. And they also have a list of other potential projects for the future. And I'll also point out that there was a mutual benefit for the county. Monmouth County has an active TAP grant right now to improve multiple Henry Hudson Trail crossings, and this location is included. So now they have a vetted design, and it was tested, and they even have some new clarity on how to improve on that. Next slide, please. So as we move forward, NJTPA is continuing to encourage this light, quick, cheap approach as part of the planning process. One of the things we have is the Complete Streets Technical Assistance Program, which I mentioned. Now we're planning a demonstration project for the township of Belleville, and it's near a middle school. It should include some treatments such as enhanced crossings and painted curb extensions, and there's going to be art in the intersection as well, and that will involve the school. we're hoping to reinforce traffic calming around that area, designate different school zone drop-offs, and encourage walking and biking to school. We also have a Planning for Emerging Centers program, another round coming down the road. There might be another Complete Streets and Tactical Urbanism project involved in that as well. And I'll share more information about that as it develops. Next slide, please. Another new kind of exciting item that we have in store is NJTPA and the Hudson Transportation Management Association are creating a Complete Streets demonstration library, and that will support broader use of tactical urbanism. We have a collection of delineators and barricades, traffic signs, stencils, a lot of other different types of materials. They'll be available for loan to communities that want to install a temporary demonstration project. So at this point, eligible borrowers can be from New Jersey municipalities and counties, and with local TMAs as a key partner. So the point of contact must be a official jurisdiction, but there can be other supporting partners as well. And just to give a quick overview of some important facts on that, this is for materials only. It doesn't include design assistance, and it needs approval by the local jurisdiction on the owner of the roadway for the design. Recipients are also responsible for pickup and transportation and installing it and returning it as well. So Collingswood, as Patrick was describing earlier, that was a first recipient of the library materials, and they were able to use it for a variety of treatments near the Patco station. Now there are some other communities that are kind of potential communities that are in the queue for this, for using these resources. I just want to point out, and consistent with what we saw in Keyport, this lending library is an initiative. It's a way to introduce new bike and pedestrian street design concepts for local officials and for the public, and to help facilitate discussion about the design standards and changes that should be coming. It's most appropriate during the planning stage. So I just want to point that out. So for example, if a town already has a bike and pedestrian plan with very specific vetted recommendations, they should be looking for longer term implementation at this point. And maybe it doesn't apply everywhere, but it's a good useful tool for anywhere that's considering new design concepts. Next slide, please. So before I sign off, I wanted to also quickly mention here that we are reiterating really that we have the active transportation plan in progress, and the goal is to develop a safe and practical network for people that want to walk and bike as a means of transportation. And we know there's a lot of work ahead to achieve that vision. So at this point, we're collecting public feedback. It's important to collect good quality feedback through our web map and survey. So please take a snap of the QR code here to participate. You can help us identify where bike and walk improvements are needed, where you like to walk, or where you would do so if the conditions were better. And please pass it along to others. It's a really broad, relevant topic for everyone. And it could set up a planning framework that will achieve that vision of kind of a regional safe network for bikes and pedestrians. So with that, I'll say thank you and pass it back to Leanne. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And thanks, everyone. Leanne.
Thanks so much, Keith. And if we can have all the presenters turn your monitors back on. Thank you for everybody hanging on there. We're to the Q&A part, and monitoring chat during this session was really fun because I loved everybody's comments, and the presentations were really excellent. So I'm going to jump right into some questions for you all that came up during the session. So this one's for James in Asbury Park. Oh, and by the way, Monika Pal had to run to class, so she sends her regrets for not staying to the end. But James, there was a question about who was involved with developing the bicycle and pedestrian master plan for Asbury Park. If you could
Sure.
explain a little bit
So,
about that.
oh yeah, there was a lot of organization there. Obviously, we had staff from our city, engineers, planners, elected officials, and residents from the city. We also had NJDOT, Monmouth County Division of Planning, Engineering and Planning, NJ Transit, Easy Ride. We had, a lot of input from focus groups and public meetings, as well as, the study advisory committee throughout the whole project process.
Thank you. I think on that note, there was a question about how did the word get out in Asbury Park about the pop-up bike lanes? And that can go to the others too, because I think that's an important part. You all touched on it a little bit. Maybe if you could explain a little bit more about how important and how you tried to get the word out in different ways. So I'll start with Asbury Park.
So other than the signs we put up at the lanes itself for pop-up bike lane things, we went ahead and did a lot of social media outreach through like our city's Facebook, Nextdoor, and stuff like that, and as well as press releases through Nixle, just to make sure everyone knows, oh, this new pop-up bike lane's coming in, check it out. Just as much as we can get out through social media, really. We didn't put any flyers or mailers out.
Patrick, what was your best communication method on this?
I really wish we could have done more of the door-to-door canvassing. That's why it's good to maybe get volunteers instead of just relying on one borough commissioner. But most effective was we really had the asset with the first project to be at community events. Those are really important.
Okay. And Keith, what did Keyport do? Oh, you're muted, Keith.
Just to reiterate the question, please.
Just how Keyport got the word out about this demonstration project going on. Was there anything that you worked well, or you wish was a little better?
Yeah, we could have been a little bit more effective with the advance notice about it. I think it was a delightful surprise to people that used it. On a positive note, it didn't really impact any neighbors or anything like that in a negative way. There wasn't a lot of parking demand or anything for the places where we extended the curbs. And, it was really, it seemed to be a welcome design improvement, even if it was temporary. However, yeah, for future cases, I would say that it's important to get the word out in advance, not only to let people know what's coming in terms of any operations disruptions, but also just to get them out there to look at it, educate them. Patrick had a lot of really great examples about education on site, and I think these are all good lessons to learn.
And one thing Easy Ride put in the chat, and they're one of our other really stellar transportation management associations in the state. They did hold a bike rodeo at Asbury Park. And then another one that's actually in our video, we show a little bit from a pop-up bike lane in West Orange. And so anytime you can partner with a TMA and have them do some sort of bicycle and pedestrian education outreach, I think is a really another good tool for getting the word out, as well as providing added education benefits. Let me get to this one, because there was a bunch of questions about the community feedback, specifically how best you addressed any concerns about loss of street parking. I don't know if anybody wants to take that first.
I'll take it. So in Asbury Park, there's a lot of talk about parking spaces, and that always removing parking spaces is always a problem. We try to minimize as many parking spaces as possible that we lose. We also made an agreement with our city council to do it outside of the summer season, because they felt that that was the busiest season for parking and for driving. So we had to make a few compromises. I think overall, the fact that it was temporary was what really sold them on it. If I had said I wanted to remove these parking spaces permanently, they would have been a much bigger fight. But saying that they're going to come back in a month, having that specific start and end time to that loss of parking really helped them be like, okay, like if anyone complains, it's coming back. And we had an opportunity to see too what losing that parking spaces would mean, and bring them back. So it wasn't a real loss.
Patrick, I think you all had some.
Yeah, so we didn't take away any legal parking. So the only parking as I mentioned, the parking at Patco was a taxi stand that wasn't in use anymore. But on the streets that were using curb extensions, cars are parking too close to the crosswalk. So what we did was about a week in advance of the project, we actually coned off the areas that would be part of that curb extension. And that got people reaching out and asking why, including while we were putting it out, there were sometimes neighbors that came out and confronted us. And we explained to them that the law was that they shouldn't be parking there, and explained the reason behind it. These were streets that were near a school. You know, explain that the little ones, you're not going to see them over the car. Some people got it, others just responded with, well, that's a dumb law. But, you know, what are you going to do? You can't win those people over, and we don't really want to, we would like to win them over, but we're not going to take that kind of feedback and do anything to change it.
That's great. And Patrick, you mentioned some other things, like I love you said, you know, don't get too caught up in the haters. Yeah. But that was another one of the questions, was to expand a little bit more on, you know, and you sort of got at it, like, what were the barriers? Like, were there any, especially was there any concerns regarding emergency vehicle access or fire truck access and that sort of stuff? And how did you deal with that?
Well, we were lucky to have someone from AECOM that was a very big supporter of this project, and actually oversaw the bicycle pedestrian master plan. So
and AECOM is an engineering firm, correct? Yes,
sorry. Too many acronyms, I'm sorry.
That's right.
So what they did was they actually had access to software that could do that. But what we were going to do if we didn't have that was actually go out and cone things off and test if vehicles could make the turns and things like that.
So you're saying AECOM used software to show that emergency vehicles could take the turn, but if you hadn't had that, you would have just tested it out with cones.
Do in advance, mark it off with cones, and see if they can do it.
Did anybody else? I don't, Keith, if that was a concern in your project.
We had some concerns around just the the design concept in itself, and I'll just say that I encourage you not to shy away from an opportunity to kind of partner up with the county or the state if it's a state roadway. It's a good starting point to build relationships if you don't have them already. As I mentioned earlier, NACTO has kind of some different set of standards. They're less familiar and popular for engineering, and especially at county and state levels. So this is an opportunity to prove those standards. You know, we know that streets are often too rigid, and this gives some flexible options. And, you know, one thing that you hear often is that there aren't enough local examples for complete streets projects or testing different designs. So I would just say that, you know, don't shy away from it, and really, it might get away from the light, quick and cheap kind of setup that you're expecting. Well, mainly that it won't be as quick, but you know, I think that it's important. It's a very effective way in the end to kind of prove new design standards, debunk the myths, and put new ideas into action.
Keith, there was one, it was not a question, but it pointed something out that I think others might find interesting. The comment was, using Rate Your Street is a great way to combine hard crash traffic data with how people perceive their streets. Can you explain more about that program, and you know, was it hard to use? Well,
I think that the online workshop activities that we had were pretty extremely easy to use, actually, because it kind of operated a lot like the way people are using the internet now anyway, almost like social media. You could drop a pin, you could sort of comment on other people's comments, and no, I think that it really aligned well with what the people perceived about their neighborhood streets, aligned well with what we could tell from a standpoint on the data for safety and crashes and so forth, the traffic volumes. So, you know, it wasn't anything mind-blowingly different from the outcome of the public feedback. You saw that lower volume neighborhood streets were more compatible for walking and biking, and then certain intersections where you could really find some conflicts, those were flagged in a way that seemed appropriate and compatible with our data. So
is that something other people can get access to Or is that something, best
It-
to, go ahead.
Oh, it wasn't from a template or anything. It was custom built, so I don't have access to that format. But I think that it's not terribly difficult to. It wasn't really anything that was, it looked like a video game, but it wasn't exactly like a video game. You had it just kind of sets it up to be a familiar and fun type of setup, but it was really very basic, and you could just click on the next activity and you do gain points. In our scenario, they gave the winner like Keyport bucks or something like that to help with the local businesses.
And then one last question that this is a good one to bring up because a few of you were on county or near county facilities. And there's a question like how much time should you give to working with the county on a project like this? And I think that also brings to the point that not all roads are local roads. There are county, there are state roads, and not all of these projects get approved on different types of roads. Like these aren't usually a state road type of project. So, but if you do want to work with the county, what would you suggest as a sort of time frame to include them? I'll start with Keith or Patrick.
I
Yeah.
will, I would say build as much time into it as possible. If you were planning on doing something within a couple months, you can probably figure that it'll take more like a better part of a year if you're involving in different engineering groups from different jurisdictions. As the MPO, we steered clear of any kind of formal agreements between them, but I'll say that the county and the municipality might want to consider how to formalize just to make clear any of the disclaimers about the responsibilities and so forth. So, and it took about, I would say 6 months or so after all was said and done, intermittent meetings and iterations of the design.
And Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, on these projects, the county was part of the grant application, so they were kind of on board from the beginning. So that was, a little over a year in advance. But we tried to approach them as soon as possible to give them a heads up, like, hey, we think we need access to this street, and then they told us what we need to do. And then we had to run design by the county engineer. Like if you can use a county road, give yourself plenty of time, because what that did require was actually having the municipal engineer, who's a consultant, so not free, drawing up formal engineering plans, even for something as simple as a sharrow. So you got to be prepared for that if that's something you're going to touch. But it worked out. They were very supportive. I would say the permit process is going to take. You should have that done at least like a month in advance of the project. You need site access. You need to have a signage plan to handle diverting traffic, all that stuff. So give yourself time. Okay.
We have to wrap up now, but I want to thank everybody for attending today. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all your questions, but I really want to say a big thank you to the excellent presentations and your the panelists today. So like round of applause, thank you so much. And also thank you to DOT for sponsoring today's event. New Jersey DOT sponsors the Safe Routes Resource Center and other projects like this. So, huge thank you to Department of Transportation. And as I'll remind everybody, these sessions was recorded. We're going to try and get it up early next week through our saferoutesnj.org website, along with the slides. And so if anybody couldn't make it today, feel free to share it when it's up on our website. And also, please come to our next Safe Routes Academy sessions. Next Thursday, our noon lunch and learn is about the TA set-aside grant training, a grant application. And it's a kind of intense one. So, if you're applying for transportation alternative set-aside grants, which is a federal grant, this is a walk through the grant about exactly how to apply for that funds. So that's next week. And then after that, we have on the Thursday, the 22nd, we have prioritizing safety through conducting walkability and bikeability assessments. So that's a little bit more of a one-on-one session. So we're looking forward to that session as well. And then our final session this year will be on Thursday, September 29th, again at noon, and it'll be on developing school travel plans and make walking and biking to school much safer. So if you know of anybody interested in those two topics, please send them our way, ask them to register. And once again, thank you for attending. One last request: when this session ends, you will be asked to do a very short little survey. It'll pop up on Zoom, and we just ask you to please give us some feedback, whatever your heart desires. It's anonymous. We won't know who's giving us feedback, but we appreciate you completing our survey and letting us know how this session was for you. So on that note, thank you again. I'm hearing all the applause, even though it's silent through Zoom, but thank you everybody for presenting today, and have a great afternoon.